Good afternoon and welcome to the Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival. This is our penultimate panel. We've been bringing you daily offerings from leading voices, human rights defenders, academics, Burma analysts, and today's panel is of particular interest to me because it is an outstanding panel about Myanmar media, courage on the front line. We're going to be talking with some leading journalists from Myanmar, Burma, as well as some foreign journalists who have been covering the country for many years to give their insights into the current situation facing the press, both those that have been covering the coup in the months preceding and the situation for the security on the ground now for the media as they continue to cover the crisis unfolding in their country. I'd like to welcome our speakers. We are joined today by Zaw Latt. He is the Yangon bureau chief of the Democratic Voice of Burma, known as DVB. Zaw Latt himself was part of the 1988 uprising, and he has decades of experience in media management as well as a journalist. DVB opened their bureau in the country when the country was at the ascending part of their political transition, and he has only recently come back from the country where he was covering the events that we saw unfolding during the violent crackdown against the protesters. We're also very happy to have with us Phil Thornton. He is a journalist and an author that has been based along the Thailand-Burma border for many decades and the author of a book about that called Restless Souls. He has also been the founder of the KarenNews.org, and he's a senior advisor to the International Federation of Journalists. And we have Tin-Lei Win, who is with the Thomson Reuters Foundation. She is also someone who was previously based in Bangkok, but returned to her country in 2015 to establish Myanmar Now, which is an award-winning news agency that gives a lot of context with background features. And she is also the co-founder of Kite Tales, which is quite an interesting project, if you have time to check it out, that chronicled the lives of everyday people across the country. Also joining us is Murat Jathu. He's a freelance journalist, blogger, and podcaster. He has started his career just over a decade ago, and he was the recipient of the Agence France Presse Keat Webb Award in 2017 for his reporting on war and conflict. He has been targeted for arrest in Myanmar for his reporting there and has only recently fled to Europe, where he is in exile and speaking to us from there. And finally, we have with us Minka Niehaus. She's an award-winning journalist who has been covering Myanmar, Burma for many decades. She was formerly reporting for various Dutch news agencies, including Trouw, and she authored several books on Burma, one of them, A Tea House in the Jungle, and Smuggled Goods. She has covered conflicts around the world, from Afghanistan to East Timor, and she is somebody who has a lot of insights into this place that has taken her heart as a journalist among the countries she has been part of. I'm going to start first with you, Zaw Latt. The Democratic Voice of Burma, of course, has been in the news because of the arrest of your colleagues. You yourself have only just come back from the country a few weeks ago. Tell us what it was like for you and your team during the weeks of the violent crackdown whilst you were covering that, not only in Yangon, but I know you had teams throughout the country. And tell us about the update on your colleagues who were arrested in neighboring Thailand.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for organizing this. Of course, when the army, there is coup on 1st February, our signet, our digital signet freeze, because we've been airing via Ministry of Information and multiplayer platform. Along with 5 other independent digital provider. Since then, we've been deliberately targeted. Like you said, recently, first journalists, there are 57 journalists remain back, 85 arrested, and four are our journalists. So first journalist sentenced to 3 years was my journalist from P, Minyo. He recently got sentenced for 3 year imprisonment with the 505A, which is incitement. Another one got another 2 year imprisonment. The journalist Aung Jo in Mye. And so, I mean, since the army coups, that there is a deliberate targeting of independent media. I mean, for DVB, army is very angry because they pulled the plug off, but we still managed to air from our satellite TV from outside, and also from our social media platform. So there is deliberate, I mean, cracking down on journalists, you know, not only in the feed, but also raiding at the nighttime. I by myself living in the 3-4 safe houses, going out very carefully because there were a lot of checkpoints, you know, having the 2-3 phones because they will go into your phone if they found some protest related, then you will be blasted. And on top of that, you know, and what amazed me is that within 4 months of coups, we gained more than 4 million viewers on our social media platform, which means there is a very high demand for independent media. We used to have only 30 million, now we have 60 million. This has happened within on Facebook, TVB TV, Facebook within 4 months. So there is very high demand due to there is a lack of independent media flow. Only army and state TV is running and run by the psychological warfare, of course, you know, and also their content is, you know, very funny. Like a lot of people queuing in at the ATM. The report will say that a lot of people deposited money, you know. So and this kind of delivering misinformation on the state or army TV. Then there is a very high demand for independent media outlet. And I have to give all the credit to unsung heroes decided to remain, you know, from both, I mean, the trained journalists or citizen journalists taking risk to reporting what is going on in the ground. And say now that, you know, there is no event that don't cover by the journalists, you know, and taking their risk, cannot even run the story with their byline. They all under hiding CJs, you know, reported by CJ, but actually there is ongoing reporting from the ground and on daily basis, taking risks. And I have to give all the credit to this unsung hero inside Burma. So it's not a good time to be journalist, quite dangerous. But of course, there is no way I'm going to silence us. There will be both trained and network of citizen journalists will reveal what is going on the ground. This is the very brief, you know, description what is going on in Burma.
It's quite interesting to see such a surge in your viewership online, what you mentioned about the growing audience. There's clearly a hunger for accurate news, and, you know, DVB has already established itself in the country, but there's also, as you said, such a risk. And many have cited the heroism of the reporters who have been covering this coup, including freelancers. I'd like to segue now to Ratchatu. And if you could just tell us, what were the circumstances that you were facing? How did you know that you were targeted for arrest? And what was the conditions for your other colleagues who themselves might be at risk currently, who have remained behind?
Firstly, I just knew that, you know, like every other journalist, I had to move around, you know, to find a place to sleep at night. And then, you know, I had to call a lot of friends, you know, is any room that their flat and apartments to sleep at night. So I'm not the only, I was not the only one at that moment. So I left my flat in the second week of the February. At the first week of the March, like March 11, the soldiers, the notorious light infantry number 77, so they just came to near my apartment. So my neighbor called me on signal that, you know, and they sent me a lot of photos. And then you should leave the country. You should leave Yangon, actually. So, and then I knew that, and then you know, I'm the only one living there, you know, who against the military. So, like my neighborhood is kind of supporting military. So a lot of informers there. So, you know, like in the first week of the coup, I had to move the place. So I knew that, and then I left Yangon on March 13th to the like we call now as escape territory in Karen state. So, luckily I was granted some visa from the Spanish embassy, and then I could get out of the territory and get to the Thailand. But now a lot of journalists, like more than thousands of journalists, are stuck in the border, who want to cross the border because like if you are in country, you cannot report by yourself, because right now what I'm doing right now is like if a lot of people is talking to me from Facebook Messenger, Telegram, WhatsApp, and almost all platforms. But if I want to confirm something from them, I have to call someone in the country, and then I ask someone to call that source to confirm something. So it's like 2-step or 3-step verification for one single event. So it's really hard to confirm a thing right now, and then there's no spokesperson of some specific organization or the political parties. Like every journalists are facing a very fragile situation right now, and then also they cannot tell where they are living, and then where they are going actually, because right now a lot of people hope very high. They expected too much from the national unity government, and then they expected too much from the journalists too. So if people know that journalists are not in the country, they just feel that they were left by the people whom they trusted. Right now it's kind of trust issue for the people, because if you are left by the people whom you can trust, it's like feeling very emotional.
Sure.
So journalists are one of them. So I think that will be a challenge for every journalist.
Sure.
That's why I'm feeling right now.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. I mean, clearly the presence of journalists who are trusted, as you mentioned, are a kind of bearing witness and in providing important documentation to what's going on, so that the people, the citizens at large, don't feel that this unchecked violence is not being recorded at all. I'd like to turn now to Martin Le Nguyen. Myanmar now was among those listed by the military junta who had their licenses revoked, along with DVB, Mizima, 7-Day, Kitri. What are you hearing now from your colleagues in Myanmar now? And what is your overarching sense of how is it possible to be a functioning journalist in these increasingly dangerous times?
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeannie. Just to say, for this panel, but also just for helping to organize the whole film festival, because I think many of us who care about Myanmar have noticed that media interest on Myanmar has dropped precipitously in the last few weeks. It wasn't like in February and March where, we were getting all these stories coming out, we're getting media requests. Suddenly, the international attention has moved away to the next breaking news. So it's just so good, and we really appreciate the fact that you're keeping the light on this issue. And just very briefly, should clarify that I'm no longer with the Thomson Reuters Foundation. I left in mid-January to go freelance. Interesting timing, and of course, for the last 4 months, I have just been really focusing a lot on what's happening in Myanmar, and the current level of repression and threats that independent media is facing, I would say, is unprecedented. You yourself said, about the independent media that's been banned. Zaw Latt and Murat just now talked about the conditions that they're facing. And I grew up in the 1980s, so I am definitely aware of the repression and threats that the journalists at that time faced. But I am saying that at this point in time, what the independent media in Myanmar are facing is unprecedented, because in the last 10 years, we've tasted freedom, however flawed or limited it may be. There was a proliferation of independent media. A lot of journalists came into the industry. Really, you know, journalism in Myanmar is extremely lowly paid profession. People are in it for the love of it, because they love the job. They want to hold power to account. They want to tell the truth. But the danger, the deliberate targeting of the journalists, like what Zaw Latt just said, and the threats that they face, not just against themselves, yeah, but their colleagues, their families, their friends, because at the moment, the junta is arresting anybody that is connected to you. You know, if they can't find you, they'll probably get your parents, they'll probably get your siblings, they'll probably get your children. So, you know, the danger is no longer just on your own person. It's so much wider. And yet, you know, despite all that challenges, my former colleagues from Myanmar now, you know, like Zaw Latt said, people from DVB, citizen journalists, you know, they're still reporting, they're still doing their jobs. And a lot of that, like you said, it is extremely difficult for journalists to operate, because just being a journalist at the moment is being a target, right? In the normal circumstances, when there's instability, you and I know we can wear the flak jacks that says press, a helmet, we go in, we protect. Now, by identifying yourself as part of the press, you can get shot, right? You'll be arrested, and then you'll be tortured. And then when you contact, you know, particularly if you are from Myanmar now or from Kithe or DVB, part of the banned or outlaw organizations, you contact your sources and you tell them who you're working for. You are working for an illegal organization. Can you trust the person you're speaking to on the phone? Can they pass your details to somebody else who can then track you down and find you? There's just, you know, the scale of risk and danger is now just so much higher than it has ever been. And again, despite that, you know, like I said, journalists are still working. A lot of that has to do with citizen journalists, just ordinary people with mobile phones, recording what is happening on the ground and working with career journalists, you know, whether it's Mrat, whether it's Zaw Latt's colleagues from DVB, whether it's Go Swee Win and other people from Myanmar, and sending all these information through. And a lot of, very often, yeah, through unsecure channels, because communications in Myanmar has become so difficult. So they are risking, these CJs, citizen journalists themselves are risking their lives to keep the world informed of what is going on. And I guess one last point I would just like to say is that, you know, I get what Mrat said just now about the worry that the public has, you know, in terms of journalists leaving, but I also see a bit of a silver lining in that people are finally seeing the value of independent media. And I think you can see that in perhaps the, you know, the rise in viewership that Zaw Latt is seeing in terms of DVB, but as well as just the amount of citizen journalists and public support for media. I mean, over the past few years, especially in the wake of what happened in, you know, northern Rakhine State with the Rohingya, atrocities against the Rohingya, there were a lot of people in Myanmar who thought the coverage of media, particularly international media or independent media, were, you know, unfair, untrue, bias against the country. And I remember my former colleagues from Reuters, right, Walon and Joso U, they were branded as traitors for exposing what the junta, the Tamador, did. Any journalists that showed sympathy towards the Rohingya or, you know, the ethnic causes were accused of, you know, taking payments, accused of being corrupt. That situation has changed. And I think there is, thankfully, this trust now from the public on independent media. They realized how important it is to have media that will be fair and accurate and be as balanced as possible. So I'm trying to, you know, keep that as a hopeful silver lining out of this terrible situation.
Interesting, and we have heard that there has been a sort of shift in consciousness among the general public, and clearly the international media have been in the hot seat for many years based upon their reporting there. Minka is no stranger to that. Minka, you have been on the ground in Myanmar, Burma for many years, including a previous crisis area during the Saffron Revolution. Do you think the international media is itself also changing now? Are they getting it right? And how do they rely on the reporting and the information from their colleagues from national media, as well as Burmese journalists who work for international media? What's your take on that?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you very much for organizing this, especially as Thin Lei Win also mentioned, attention is fading, sadly, as it always happens with news and the media move on to another story. I think a festival like this one is just an excellent occasion to bring the situation in Myanmar to the spotlight again. I would also really like to pay my utmost respect to the colleagues in Myanmar from the safety of my home in Amsterdam, which is not my favorite way of, reporting on a story. Talking about silver lining, I think one of the good things in what we are seeing is the appreciation for local journalists. I've always felt that I was never able to do my job without them. And I often wondered about the role of, being a foreign journalist and covering sometimes, 15 countries. The added value of local journalists, I felt for a long time, has been underestimated, and it is high time to discuss how we can, as international media, benefit more from their knowledge and their expertise, and that good journalism is teamwork. And I think if there's anything very clear now is that without hardly or perhaps not even a single foreign journalist on the ground, the fact that stories are still coming out, we really owe it to our colleagues out there. And for the past 10 years, it's just extraordinary. There have always been good journalists in Myanmar, but now the level of professionalism and expertise and the number of stories are coming out. I think it really gives us an opportunity to reassess foreign reporting and international media. How can we benefit from the work of our colleagues on the ground? At the same time, taking care and being very aware of the risks they are taking. It's do no harm is really something that we need to keep in mind. People take tremendous risks, and the people local journalists speak to are at grave danger, and it's not just themselves, but their families are being targeted. Unlike foreign journalists, a lot of local journalists, if most of them cannot leave the country, the risks are enormous, but I also see an opportunity to benefit from the work that they do.
Really insightful, and perhaps there could be some strengthened alliances that emerge from this, given what you've just said. And I have heard nothing but praise from the more seasoned foreign journalists who have been covering Myanmar, Burma for a long time, including from the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand and neighboring Thailand. Just what a laudable effort they have seen their colleagues doing, and the tireless work that they've done, the risks they've taken. Phil, I'm going to turn to you now, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to share my screen. This was a piece that you wrote for the IFJ some back in April. Myanmar, I'm scared, but I will not surrender. Journalists in Myanmar are putting their lives at risk to tell the stories of protesters, doctors, nurses, and citizens impacted by the military coup. And in that, you also featured a photojournalist, Mong, who was shot while he was taking photographs and had fractured his hand. Phil, from the perspective of the IFJ and looking at the protection of journalists, what are the key issues that you think the international community needs to be aware of right now?
Well, I think there's probably many, but first of all, thank you, Jenny, for organizing this, and hello to all my colleagues, and a massive payout and respect to Burmese journalists. Yeah, I think, from that story you mentioned, from day one, the journalist who got shot, I remember him saying to me, we need more identification as journalists on the street, so that, they know who we are. They can identify that we're different from protesters because we're covering an event. That soon shifted to the press identification becoming a large target on their backs, to eventually that photojournalist getting shot by a sniper. Luckily, it was a hand injury, but still a smashed hand. And as everybody's pointed out, it has drifted a bit in the international news cycle. I know in Australia, it's now a teletext line at the bottom of the screen, if that. But nothing has changed. I mean, it's just the international attention has dropped a little. And that in itself takes away protection from journalists because it's not in the spotlight. This is, the country's been run by an organized crime syndicate called the Burmese Military. But, and I talked to journalists last night who are hiding out. They've gone from wearing identification that's made them targets to, as other people have pointed out, to they can't go home. And that means when you can't go home, you're dislocated. You lose all your possessions, your appliances you've spent years buying, and systems that you set up. And suddenly you're hiding out, you're on the run. But what's fascinating and amazing is the people I'm talking to are still writing stories. They're still producing work. They're still writing worthwhile stories. And as the journalist pointed out to me last night, it's not only the coup we have to report on. There's many issues that are affecting people because of the coup. There's COVID, which is a massive thing in most countries, yet we're not hearing very much about it in Burma. There's the cost of living. People who are reliant on day labor no longer have the wages to survive. Ordinary people can't draw more than $150, $180 a week from their bank accounts. Their personal security is smashed. I talked to a medic last night who told me they've lost 6 children who are waiting for operations, and because of can't go to transport, can't go to a hospital, 6 children have died waiting for surgery. I mean, these are shocking, preventable deaths.
Sure.
International community, I feel, can do a lot more, massive more, including journalists. I mean, even on a personal level, a $200 donation will keep a journalist working for a month. At this stage. But on the other hand, if you're going to use images and you're going to use footage from Burma, pay for it. Pay journalists for doing it. Don't just put photo supplied, images supplied, because we know it's not supplied. You've just taken it off the internet. So for a message to international outlets, pay for what you're using and use the journalists. I mean, one of the things that Burma's reached a fantastic level of journalism that probes and investigates, and it should be rewarded for that work, other than with jail sentences. So there's some of the things I would say, but there is this sort of what would you say, collectivism starting to happen between the journalists, and we're in contact. I mean, each of us have our own particular networks. But I know for a fact that the Karen journalists have been helping out the journalists who've got to the border on their area, and it's happening on other border lines as well. So there is a sort of coming together for journalists. But I think for international organizations like IFJ, we have to sort of cement that and try to get as many people as members. I know at the moment that Myanmar Journalist Network are about to become an affiliate of the IFJ, which will give them and their members more organizations that we can help, the better it is. I mean, there's lots of journalists who are, there's 87 we know of who've been arrested. They will need legal help at some point, and they will need ongoing help, as will their families, because that's 87 families that are disrupted and lose their means of earning a living. So we can help on many levels. You know, one, we can personally donate. Any money I make from a story on Burma goes straight back to journalists in Burma, because as Binka pointed out, you can't do it without the local people. You cannot write it. One of the reasons I formed Karen News was because similar situation in 2011, by covering the story, we often put local people at risk because, you know, Thai authorities would say, well, we're not letting you take any humanitarian aid if you let journalists in. So, you know, local people do it better than us because they're on the ground. We can help. We can become a conduit for them on the outside, but local journalists do it much better.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept about the paradigm shifting, whereby the foreign media used to think that they would only hire locals as fixers or researchers, right? But they were the journalists, and now it's actually inverted. I think that the foreign journalists need to follow the lead of the expertise, the language, the cultural insight, the political ability to have your ear to the ground for that. And I also think it's an important point about not just acknowledging thanks for the use of materials, but compensating people for it. Thank you for sharing that, Phil. Zaw Latt, I'm going to turn back to you, and I'd like to just begin by sharing this screenshot. This was just released by the Assistance Association for Political Prisoners yesterday. They are tracking, of course, the deaths, the detentions, the arrest warrants listed. And as many of our panelists have said, including Thin Lei Win, you know, the story is somewhat fading from the limelight, but when you look at a graphic like this, it is clearly far from over. And many would say that perhaps there is more violence to come as many people are fleeing to the ethnic areas, and the military has begun assaults on those ethnic areas. What do you think are the key issues now that the Myanmar media will be covering in these coming months, as the focus has somewhat come away from the urban areas, but perhaps gone towards the border areas where people, civilians, villagers are seeking shelter away from their homes to flee from these attacks? What do you think DVB's priorities are going to be in terms of the story to keep it going forward?
Actually, we will keep reporting. You're quite right that, you know, this number of death, of course, you know, I mean, it's every day increasing, and mainly now, very weirdly, particularly two regions, one in Chin and one in Karenni, where there is no armed resistance before. Most of the armed resistance is in Karen, Kachin, Chin. But the relatively very calm Chin state, for example, it's having half of the state is having a kind of open conflict. And also Karenni. Karenni has a few insurgents, but now it's more like, you know, younger people are very angry because there is a severe oppression, and also you will see Yangon and Mandalay, there is a bomb blast and there is assassination of, I mean, the local administrative officer, and so Burma is seriously heading to more violence, more radical, more conflict. I mean, like the previous speaker already mentioned, there will be multi-dimensional crisis or heading to a failed state, not only big political pictures, you know, and but also, I mean, there is a health crisis, there is a social crisis. I mean, people are more scared. I mean, there is COVID because we share border with India, and you know the Chin state is, you know, Tamil is one of the shared border, and also Thailand, a lot of interactive. But we have to scare army more than this COVID. You know, of course, people are scared. And at the same time, army sees a lot of medical facility, because they want to take all the credits. That if you are, there's a recently army facility, very poor facility compared with outside government about COVID center reopen, and also a lot of people, I mean, the health is not priority at the moment. You are security, and also you are day-to-day living. How are you going to survive? And at this, of course, media always give attention on the big conflict or impact, the story. But there are a lot of stories impacting a lot of people. We are talking about, there is UN estimated 2.5 million going to be displaced and happening currently. And now, even the UN recently said give access, and the army is not going to allow. Like Bowman and current, they're quite experienced, but currently there are lots of growing IDPs. So I think we will continue. These are the numbers that you just show. We feed those numbers to the international agency like UN, like verifying facts. We verify where do they got shot, where did they, what happened, what is their background, on what condition, and also every 8 p.m. news there is a increased warrant list. I mean, at least 20 people a day, mainly targeting celebrity journalists. The way they target big people, big names, the army tactic is they want to scare you basically. So it's go to the big fish or bigger names. And or in terms of politics, arrest Aung San Suu Kyi, the president. In terms of media, arrest or send the big media guys or celebrity. There lots of movies that have been targeted. And their tactic is they deliberately want you to scare. And that is, at the same time, there is a very clear resistance from especially younger generation. And don't forget that we got 5 million first-time voter in November 2020. And majority Burmese, are under 30 to 35. We have very young age, generation who are forefront of this resistance. So I think we were carried on both, and the problem is a platform that now our digital channel is free, and so we are on satellite. And recently, Army is targeting satellite dish. If you own satellite, satellite PSN satellite dish carried by DVB the Myanmar, they were charged with 500,000 Jat and 1 year imprisonment. And also, I mean, of course, the Facebook, Messenger, and Twitter are out, but a lot of them know how to use VPN and proxy, and they will keep receiving. And even we have to consider the radio. There is a growing, like federal FM, underground FM, and lots of newsletter. And there is a very controlled internet access. Seem like only MITRE, which is a two biggest army, Burmese army and Vietnamese army run telecommunication is the only best internet at the moment, where the gateway, or the gateway is controlled by the armies. They try to control, but of course we will continue. Mainly this conflict, or because of, I mean, there is conflict not because of political crisis, but because of military coups. I mean, the coup create both, politics, economic, social, even communication are quite difficult. It's upside down. At the same time, there is a very young generation not going to let this happen, and they are not going to go back to the dark age like 1988, our generation. So I think it's going to be a long fight. Both sides are very powerful. I mean, there is no way, no turning point. They go too far, like, killing almost 900 and arresting 5,000 and around 2,000 on warrant list and daily chase, and at the same time there is a daily resistance. So there will be, I mean, quite a lot of ongoing challenges. All we wish is, we don't want to be, I mean, to see a lot of bloodshed, but it seems unavoidable. And at the same time, there is a control on the media space, independent media space and platform. And so I think it is going to be the long struggle about this crisis. And I think that both sides are quite powerful, and there is no turning point at the moment. So I think the independent media are going to be very busy. At the same time, like Phil said, we are going to need from the personal to institutional support, because we left all our studio, our office, we left bare hand to borderline. you know, and at the same time, we are keep producing our media contents. In terms of contents, we don't reduce our contents from the TV on their platform. So I think, I mean, we have to prepare for this long fight, and there is no way that this conflict is going to over very near futures.
You know, the reliance on digital information has really shifted this revolution in comparison, for example, to the 2007 Saffron Revolution, or even the disaster during Cyclone Nargis, because despite your license being revoked, you still have this incredible viewership online. We've opened it up to questions, and I'm going to turn this to both Ratchaw Thu and Thin Lay Win. The question from Kenneth Wong is are there any Myanmar media outlets that have actually chosen to work with the junta's State Administration Council, the SAC, and its Ministry of Information? Or do you feel that, generally speaking, the media outlets are pretty much unified in their refusal to cooperate with the junta? Do you want to address that, Ratchaw Thu? You're on mute, Comrade. You're on unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah. Like some of the news outlets are now cooperating with the military, and then 2 or 3 people leak the wife of the Minister of Home Affairs. So the voice recording of the wife of Minister of Home Affairs leaked to me. And then in this voice recording video, even she talked to her fellow wives of other military soldiers, and then she mentioned wanting that they are receiving the advice and suggestions of the former veteran journalists about how Aung San Suu Kyi and the NUGs are doing inside the interim government. So that means news outlets, some news outlets and former editors who are pro-military editors happen to the military inside. I think you got the answer.
We can hear you fine, Comrade. Can you still hear us?
Yes, I can. I do.
Okay. Very interesting. I'd like to turn to Thin Lay Win for a moment. And Thin Lay Win, before I turn to you, I just wanted to go because I thought it was important to mention one of your colleagues, Tintin Aung from Myanmar News, who was arrested. This was a piece written by Nandita Haskar, who is a friend of Tintin Aung. But I'd just like to get your feedback on what you think are the stories as a freelancer that you are now able to cover to keep Myanmar Burma in the spotlight. And as Zaw Latt mentioned, I think perhaps we are in for a long and rough road ahead that will see more conflict and certainly more military actions in the ethnic borderland areas. What do you think you're going to be focusing on in these coming months?
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, I had hoped that this was going to be sort of a blip in the historical timeline of Myanmar, and it doesn't look like that's going to be the case. It looks like this is going to be long and drawn out, and, you know, instability and violence is rising. What couple of things that I'm going to be looking at in the coming weeks and months, and I've already done a story on it, is looking at the food security situation, particularly in the border areas and minority ethnic areas. It's already, so these are areas that are already affected by conflict way before, and then particularly in places like Kachin, you know, northern Shan, the fighting with the KIA that started 10 years ago had already displaced tens of thousands of people. They were in shelters, and now they're being affected again by the coup. So, you know, it's a story of multiple tragedies all in one, you know, conflict, coup, COVID-19, all of that having a massive impact on the cash crunch which has an impact on commodity prices, which makes it so much more difficult for people who've lost their jobs as a result of either the COVID-19 or coup to afford food, whose prices had risen as a result of all those things. And it's become a vicious cycle. And without, humanitarian agencies having access, international humanitarian agencies having access, a lot of the local agencies who's been working on the ground are really stretched to the limit. And I think that's going to be a story that I want to follow. And I'll be honest with you, I want to follow and keep reporting it because I think there needs to be international attention. There needs to be more push from international actors to try and get humanitarian access, to try and make sure also that that access is delivered directly and not through the junta. I think, not just personally, but I would like for international media, because some of the things that local media is extremely good at is digging into what is happening on the ground, what are some of the movements within the, the junta, the State Administrative Council, or the machinations that's going on. But I think the international media and freelancers should also be really looking at who's still dealing with the junta, which countries, which businesses are looking to reinvest, what kind of projects are still going on. There's going to be a lot more natural resource extraction going on, because that's what the junta is going to rely on to run their bureaucratic machinery. They've always relied on selling Myanmar's natural resources to keep themselves in power, and I think that's going to get a lot worse. So who's going to be doing all the mining, the oil, gas, the timber, and that's going to have another almost like a dominoes falling. That's going to have an impact on the environment. Myanmar is already extremely vulnerable to changes in climate. That's going to have another snowball in terms of humanitarian crisis. That's going to have in terms of flooding, the droughts. That's going to have crop failures, people being displaced. I mean, yeah, it's going to be bad news mostly. But I think there is a lot of room for both local and international media to keep the spotlight on and to keep digging into people who are, who are keeping the junta running, what kind of businesses, what's going on, and to keep the international community, the governments that always, give these platitudes about human rights and how much they care for the Myanmar, to really walk the talk. Yeah, if you really want to help people, don't do business with a junta, don't give them money, make sure the businesses in your country don't do that. And I think one way to do that is for the international and local media to keep a spotlight on those issues.
Very interesting. We actually had a panel on natural resources, and they were discussing this very thing about strangulating the source of the flow of revenue. And the United States recently passed a sanction on the timber trade. I'm going to jump back to Phil just for a moment, and then I'll come back to you, Minka. I'd just like to share, Phil, this is a dated map, but just for any of our viewers who are not familiar with the Myanmar, Burma, Thailand border and the ethnic areas where the refugees are now gathering, including the place that you called home for many years in Mae Sot. Phil, what are you hearing from the Karen News Organization? Your colleagues, you mentioned that you're in touch with the Karen journalists who are now actually hosting some of the urbane Burmese or other ethnic journalists who have fled from Mandalay or Yangon or other areas to the safety of these border areas controlled by some of the ethnic armies. I just wanted to put this up for a moment because Martin Le Nguyen was also talking, and so was Koto Zaw Latt, about the areas, Chin State, Kachin State, which has had conflict for their anniversary of the 10 years just passed of the resumption of hostilities there. Kaya State, the very small state, which has seen massive violence, including the bombings of Catholic churches and schools. Cayenne State, also called Karen State, which is where you have much experience, Phil. What are you hearing from the Karen colleagues? And are they covering the refugee crisis? Do they think that it's a story that's going to get even bigger? And how are they interacting with these visiting journalists who they're now hosting in the sanctuary of their areas?
Well, I think on the first level, the last part of the question about the journalists, they're interacting very well. They're helping each other, they're helping their colleagues. They've organized to get things like basic things like mosquito nets, food, rice to the journalists, because we're in the middle of a wet season, and suddenly they go from living in the metropolitan areas to suddenly be living in the jungle is quite difficult. And Iraq had a recent taste of that. I spoke also with the Karenni journalists last night, Kantawadi Times, and most of those journalists have gone into hiding along with many Karenni people because they're getting smashed. And the more isolated these areas are, the more difficult it is for foreign journalists to access and to verify, to satisfy their news management. So those stories are still not being told. Kantawadi Times, most of those journalists now live in jungle. Some of them have the pregnant family members, elderly and young. And when I say monsoon, we've all experienced the monsoon, and it's incredibly difficult to try to keep healthy in that environment. International media often it picks the easy or the so-called sexy story. You know, the story that's done the rounds recently has been Generation Z joining with armed groups. That's only a small, sexy part of the story.
Right.
The hardest thing is we're looking at, you know, over 50,000 IDPs in Karen State, more so in up in Karenni State, and then up in Shan State, and across Kachin State and Chin State. There's people being displaced in tens of thousands. And then we've forgotten totally about the 90,000 refugees that have been in limbo for 30 years on the Thai-Burma border in nine camps. So these are all huge, massive stories. And as we mentioned before, it needs, you know, us as individuals and us as journalists to try to keep that attention or spotlight on the issues. And there's many to choose from. But also we can encourage our international colleagues to be more mindful of it and to work through local journalists, because I still think there's a slight distrust if you've got the local journalists doing it and not the international journalists doing it for the, you know, for example, in Australian media, we always like to have an Aussie in the story, you know, particularly an Anglo-Aussie. So it's true. We've got many ethnic Australians, but they always go, oh, we want, the traditional looking Anglo-Aussie fronting something. So we got to get past that. I mean, and we got to, you know, push and keep pushing, because the situation at the moment is a crisis. Yes. And we need also for the NGO community, international NGO community, to step outside their comfort zone and be, you know, often when there's a crisis, they pick the locations that are sort of comfortable zones. You know, they'll pick, for example, in Thailand, Chiang Mai, or they'll pick Bangkok. They rarely pick a border zone where the help is needed. Right. They'll fly down, they'll fly in, and they'll fly out. But you really don't get to understand the local infrastructure unless you're actually on the ground for a considerable amount of time. Right. Because coming to, somewhere like a border area, it depends on informal structures. I recently heard that a shipment of medicine that was allowed to go through was stopped at a checkpoint, and half the medicine had to go to the authorities that stopped it, and half went to the displaced people. There are local issues that happen. You know, we call it security, but it's often basically paying a bribe so we can get humanitarian aid and through. So local, or not local, international NGOs have got to get smart, street smart, and start to understand that situation. Right. And not just deal through, they've got to deal through the informal networks that exist, as well as journalism in Burma reaching a level of sophistication that it hasn't seen in my time, that it has now. The local civil society groups have also, their expertise has also grown, and their methods of dealing and negotiating the way through border, sort of security areas is phenomenal. And it has to be plugged in too.
Yes.
But what NGOs tended to create a contradiction, I think, in a sense, when it opened up, so-called opened up. I never really believed it did open up. There were certain things relented on, but most of them worked inside and left the border areas, and now want to come back to the border areas because that's where the crisis is and that's where the dollars are. But the 90,000 refugees on the border are a symbolic sense of the failure of the international NGO community, because they deserted those 90,000, cut the rations by more than half, went inside to work with the particular military-backed government at the time, and ignored the crisis that existed on the border, which it still is. So we've got to have not a myopic view of it, we've got to have a more broad and realistic view of it. You're dealing with an organized crime syndicate. And as other people have pointed out, they will rape the country, they will rip the natural resources out while they can. They will put in infrastructure that allows them to do that, and they will shore up their wealth. I don't know why, it's mind-boggling why anybody would want any more wealth than they've got. But I mean, that's what's being dealt with, I think, at the moment.
Yes. Well, certainly we have seen many of the Myanmar social media posts referring now to the junta. They don't even use the word junta, they just use the word terrorists to describe the military right now. The establishment of an international corridor to deliver humanitarian assistance to these newly displaced tens of thousands of refugees is a critical issue. Minka, in your career, you're certainly not one of the people who flew into the big city and reported from there. You definitely got out into the monsoon, into the mud to report and see firsthand the suffering of these displaced people. Do you think that this looming humanitarian crisis with the refugees is a story that would get international attention in terms of international media wanting to have an appetite for that kind of reporting? Or what do you think the story is going to be in the coming months based upon your long experience in Burma, Myanmar?
Well, I think the fact that Myanmar, Burma has been in the news also creates opportunities, because the public did get to know the place, and it has a lot of questions like what kind of country is it? What makes people go to the streets? What happened? I mean, in the end, there is room, I think, always for slow journalism when the news moved on. But that requires the art of telling a story. And that's not just news or political analysis. We need to put on our glasses as an anthropologist or a sociologist or a psychologist. And, there's so many stories to tell about how this situation impacts people's daily lives. And there's plenty of opportunity to tell those stories. And I think in general, it's often the case that editors tend to underestimate the appetite that people do have for stories, but you need to tell them well. And it takes time. It's not something that you can do just overnight. And that's where the slow journalism comes in, and the teamwork, and having people with a long connection to the place. So I would really think there is opportunity now to tell these stories, and we all have the responsibility to push the editors and at the desk, not to forget about Myanmar. I would like to mention another issue when it comes to important stories, and I really hope that the colleagues in Myanmar also take this to heart, that even though I can imagine that sometimes they really feel frustrated and they're reporting on the most horrific incidents, and the world doesn't seem to take proper action. But let's not forget that what they are also doing, they are documenting these tremendous human rights abuses.
Yes.
And there is still, the case at the International Criminal Court. And so the stories that they are reporting on, even though maybe sometimes it feels it doesn't have an impact, there will be a day when those responsible will be held to account. And I think that's another important aspect of the story, where local journalists and international journalists can work together on the issue of international justice and holding those who are the perpetrators accountable.
Quite a crucial point that you've made there, and particularly vital for journalists that work in visual medium, whether it's still photography or video documentation, because it is actually harnessing evidence that could be submissible in that ICC. We've come to the closing part of this panel. The time has flown by because you all have so much to say, but I would like to give the closing time to Comrade Javu and Koto Zaw Latt and Martin Lewin, if you'd like as well, to just tell us now, as concisely as you can, what is it you need? What do you need in terms of support for Myanmar media to continue its work, both for colleagues that are remaining inside the country, as well as those that have had to flee, some of whom I understand also lost their equipment, laptops, phones, cameras, in order to continue doing their job? What would you like to see? Koto Zaw Latt, I'm going to start with you, because at a recent webinar I attended that you spoke at, you also mentioned the need for training, for kind of reorienting and bolstering the skills of some of these newly emerging citizen journalists with a bit more of technical savvy and a bit more of the code of what journalism is built upon. Let's start with you and tell us what you need to support Myanmar media.
Thanks, Jenny. We are back to square. I mean, TVB exiled media in 1992, 31 years ago, 29 years ago. Now we are back to exile again. So TVB, this is the 2.0 TVB exile again. So we left everything behind, and I'm not alone. As you know, we were inside Burma since 2012, and the Deng government insisting that we would tolerate independence, media and criticism. Please come back. That was the long story short. And then we went back, and we were there for 9 years. Now we are back to exile again and leaving everything behind. As I mentioned, our office studio, a lot of people voluntarily remain, a lot of people left, a lot on borderline, and a lot on overseas. But, like TV, of course, we need human resource for sure. And what we don't need is, we don't need a big camera anymore, because there's no one there to carry the big camera.
Right.
So everything going to adjust with the smaller, high powerful, at the same time we are doing the television. We need a good sound, good pictures,
Yes.
and with the smaller equipment. This is, first, of course, human resource. We need to retrain. There is a very famous documentary about DVB Burma VJs.
Yes.
Close reporting from close country. It is reveal how we train, how we build the network. So of course we need to set up the network. We need to train people how to report from the close country, and also at the same time we need to manage, broadcasting which is also getting much easier, but we still need a lot of equipment, technical assistance. I mean, in these days you can do remote from wherever you are, or cloud access, a bit more sophisticated. And rather than physical location, you still need a satellite uplink for broadcast, right, or and that kind of things. At the same time, Army is really scared of getting the information, independent information. Recently, one captain said he got independent information and decided to defect. So one of the key reasons Army trying to control internet accesses, they worry that soldiers were getting the accurate information. That is their main concern. They only think about their security, and then they were defeated and they were turned their barrel of guns back to them. That is their main concern. So they're making sure that they don't want soldier and police to get in independent information. That's why they're trying very hard. So we need alternative connectivities and connections, from existing one. We're talking about big video file in the old days, and then upload in a very unsecure open source, mainly controlled by the Army gateway. I already talked about telecommunication, MyTels, their attempt to give a biggest, internet connection. And so I think there are quite range, starting from human resources to technical platform. We still need to do multiple platform because we started as a shortwave radio. We are thinking of going back to shortwave too, and then we do the satellite TV and then digital TV. So we need multiple media platform as well. At the same time, also, of course, human resources the first who dare to do the existing one, and then newly recruit. And then we want but like Minka said, there is a strong demand for documentation, mainly for the focus on citizen journalists.
Yes.
So we need to provide them good training, and then how to make it a really soundbite clip into system, both to inform locally and internationally. We got a huge task ahead of us with a very limited resources. And at the same time, we left all our commercial income. Once we were there for 10 years, and then we managed somehow, diversify our income, and we have to leave all of them. And now we are back to the donor dependence and others, and also Faye mentioned that, we stay getting some money from our clips or smaller income. So from the human resource training and technical equipment, and we need everything, basically, we are reporting very under resources and taking the huge task. I think so. Every contribution will be good from the, not only physical, money, resources, technical, but also some training, human resource, and make sure we need a lot of citizen journalists, trained citizen journalists and complicated network to counter this, information and blackout. So I think, there is a long list, but also we can work. We are very welcome, whoever like to, join in this, whatever you can. We quite need a lot of resources.
Thanks for sharing that. And for our viewers, the film that Koto Zaw Latt mentioned is actually in our film festival. Burma VJ is one of our featured films in this festival. It was nominated for an Oscar. And I believe both Minka and Phil witnessed the seminal birth of DVB when it was still a radio station situated along the border area in a remote area of the Thailand-Burma border. Quite incredible that this circle has come back to this now. Komrachatu, what do you need for your continued work as a journalist, speaking not only for yourself, but the colleagues that you know who have remained inside Myanmar, Burma?
I think I don't need anything right now because honestly, but at first I need to get some asylum here in Spain. So after that, I can tell you things. But on the other hand, there are hundreds of journalists who are unemployed by their media agencies during the coup. And then I personally managed to get over like $7,000 for 60 journalists from the groups, donation groups who wanted to help journalists. So who are, now jobless now. So $100 for each, literally. So it's nothing. Most of the journalists are now selling curries and delivering food for money. Like Phil urged international journalists to pay some cash for local journalists. Even if you want to pay the money to the journalists from the foreign country, you cannot pay it because the journalists cannot even recharge phone bill to the phone to use internet actually.
Right.
Because at the other hand, that's another thing I want to talk is almost all media is now trying to break the news They just follow the big headlines. I mean, more on breaking news. But that's why people are consuming on breaking news, what's happening where. Like actually, they don't care about what national unity government is doing, but they care about they are hoping like United Nations and peacekeeping forces are coming to kill me online. This kind of thing. They're concerned about that kind of fake news. What the people need now is fact checking and investigative stories and explanatory. This kind of things people are thrilling to read. Like big media agencies like DVB and Myanmar Now and that. Like I think we should big media should consider to explain that kind of thing to the people. And then, news outlets should consider to calm the people down, the emotion of the people, actually. Media is responsible, to explain what the national unity government is doing and how this revolution's taking time, because, people think that the revolution will win and the PDF and other forces can kill me online and next month. This kind of thing people are thinking the way right now, but the whole media industry doesn't explain that, in my opinion. And then what Myanmar media failed before the coup was to inform the people that the possible coup is underway. That no media, like except Myanmar Now is an exception. So Myanmar Now informed the people that the possible coup is underway, but no other medias did that. That's why the people had no idea what is coming to them. So I think right now the media is still responsible to explain how the revolution is going and how the whole thing is going for the future. And then we should explain on the people to prepare for next 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. So that's what we should do right now.
So more education, more context to have the citizens at large really grasp the complexities that lie ahead. Matin Le Nguyen, if you could concisely tell us what do you think is needed, for example, for your colleagues at Myanmar Now to continue their work?
I guess, just very briefly, just any practical support that they need, not just Myanmar Now, but pretty much any media outlet in Myanmar. And I think particularly for those in minority ethnic regions, because they were already operating with very limited resources even before the coup. So whether it's, helping to pay salaries, providing, citizen journalists with burner phones, helping them set up a new operation again, just any type of practical support that media outlets need should be on the table. Essentially, what I'm asking for donors, supporters, well-wishers is to be flexible and adaptable depending on what the needs are, and not to go into it with the fixed idea of what the needs are and how they should be done. Because I think independent media in Myanmar has really stepped up to the challenge. And over the past 4 months, they have shown that they can survive and do a good job despite all the challenges and the risks that they face. But there are big questions as to how long they can continue without sustained support. And I think that sustained support needs to come very soon. And one last point is, please do not forget about Myanmar, about what is happening in Myanmar at the moment. Please keep reporting it. If all you can do, if you cannot provide monetary support, practical support, if all you can do is to keep talking about it, please keep talking about it.
Very good. Closing thoughts from Phil and then Minka.
Yeah, I would agree with Tin Le Nguyen. Don't forget about Burma, and what you can do. There is methods, even though the banks have been closed, there is ways, as I mentioned before, that you can get support, and we can get support to people, and the other point that Murat made about educating people, that it's a long process. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not about the big conflict moments. It's about all the other stuff.
Thank you, Phil. Minka?
Thank you, Jenny.
Yes, let's not forget, and let's do whatever we can. All small acts help. I think we can all do, as journalists, do something on social media and retweet the stories of our colleagues in Myanmar. We can urge people to subscribe to their publications and their platforms, or make donations. Keep talking, even in your own circles. I really notice that there is an appetite. I can't say it often enough. Since Myanmar has been in the news for the last 4 months, people are really curious to know more. So let's use the opportunity and not be prematurely nihilistic and think that the news is gone and therefore Myanmar will be gone. Let's turn it around and use those previous news stories to keep telling the story in a broader sense.
Yes, I wanted to acknowledge that one of our live listeners now, Reverend Karen Harrison, wanted to know about a list of recommended journalists who are covering the NUG and the long road ahead. And Reverend Karen, I would also urge you to, all of our speakers on our platform, if you click on their name, you will be able to access their website and contact them to get that information. And she did want to share the message to have you please keep up your good work, as hard as it is. I'd just like to go out on sharing this screen, not necessarily for the headline about the Americans, but this was an opinion piece that came out in the Washington Post just today. 50 journalists have been imprisoned. It happens that 2 of them are Americans, but this is a dire threat to press freedom. This is an unacceptable situation where people who are doing this noble profession are at risk of detention, are having to flee for their lives. And as the Washington Post banner says, I thought it would be interesting to go out on just reading their banner slogan: democracy dies in darkness. Indeed, this is what drives many of the journalists who are with us on this panel today to do their job. If you have been informed, if you have been moved by this excellent panel, please donate what you can. The Burma Benefit Spring Film Festival is 100% going to support nonviolent members of the civil disobedience movement, including media. If your heart has been moved here and your heart has been opened, please open your wallet. Please make a donation, whatever you can, according to the means of what you have, and we will ensure that it is delivered to those that need it inside Burma, Myanmar. Tomorrow will be our final panel. It will be hosted by one of our colleagues on the film festival team, Gaetano Maeda, and it is the first ever panel we're having with just filmmakers. We've had quite a lot of very dense topics all week, from human rights, refugees, media, environmental issues, but this will be a chance to just meet some of the filmmakers, including some Burmese filmmakers who are part of this incredible array of films, over 39 films. Please tune in, watch it, share it. Because of popular demand, we have extended the festival by 1 week. So you will now have an extra week to watch these films and to watch these panels and to spread the word and get your friends to donate and to be informed and to advocate. I'd like to thank all of the people on the film festival team, including Tano Maeda, Ellen Bruno, Reverend Alan Sonake, Greg Butensky, and Kenneth Wong. I'd also like to thank Max Saubery, who's given us the technical support this evening, and most especially to this really excellent panel that we've just had. Thank you so much, Komrat Jathu. Thank you, Matin Lei Win. Thank you, Koto Zaw Latt. Thank you, Minka. And thank you, Phil. We appreciate your sharing your expertise and your insights with us tonight. If you're listening, spread the word. Burma Spring Benefit Film Festival. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and the website. Support media in Burma, Myanmar. Support the movement to create peaceful change for justice, security, and democratic future. Thank you all very much for joining us. This is Jeannie Hallisey, and we'll be closing this panel now.